Good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield News anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
All right, Scott, as we take a look at this week, let's start first and talk about what happened on the markets and give us a recap on the livestock side of things.
Yeah, so if we look at where we were for hogs for the week, cash hog prices were up about $4 for the week. So we saw strength in terms of those pork prices. I think that was led in large part by the fact that pork cutout value was up about $4.50 for the week. And again, I will say when you look at that pork cutout value, it was led in large part by bellies that were up nearly $14 for the week. So some strength occurring on the pork side of the equation. If we look at the cattle side of the markets this week, we did see fed cattle prices that were down a little more than $3 a hundredweight for the week. I will say again, we're seeing some slowdown in those prices relative to the very high levels that we saw a couple of weeks ago. Feeder cattle for the week, 1 to 4 lower. Feeder calves for the week were also steady to 3 lower. So a little lower prices across the board on the cattle front. If you look at beef prices, we do see choice beef prices are up $4.12 for the week. It is the start of getting into the grilling season, I think full bore. And when you look at the rib side of that beef cutout value up over $18 for the week, it tells you where we're getting some strength in terms of that box beef cutout.
Are we surprised to see the market move the way it did this week, or any outside factors that would push it one way or the other?
Oh, I think when you look at the cattle side, we are just seeing some correction relative to where we were a couple of weeks ago with those very high prices. It is good to see some strength in terms of that choice beef cutout. If you look at the choice select spread, for example, we hit a record here this week, Wednesday, of over $26. So it is telling me that some of those higher quality beef cuts are demanding some good premium right now. But by and large, a little more quiet week than maybe we've seen for a while.
Scott, when we talk about really anything lately as it relates to the livestock side of things, demand is key. Let's talk a little bit. Consumer confidence numbers came out. As we look at that, is it good news? All right, let's start first what happened with the numbers and what they showed, but is that good news for livestock producers?
Yeah, so when you look at what we have from consumer sentiment for May of this year, it is up 0.7% relative to April. So it is good news in that overall index. I remind us all the time that when you look at it relative to a year ago, we're still up over 3% in terms of that consumer sentiment index relative to just a year ago. It reminds me all the time that when you think about the general economy and what's happening in this country, we continue to see fairly strong economic growth. We see unemployment that's going down. All of that, in my book, helps us in terms of domestic meat demand. We've continued to talk a lot about the large supplies of meat that we're bringing to the market. And the fact that we've been able to bring those large supplies of meat to the market without pushing prices much lower tells me we are getting some real demand growth. And that consumer sentiment index gives us a good indication of what's coming. And, if you look at that index, the expectations portion of that index still shows a lot of strength. So folks are still fairly bullish as we look ahead in 2017. The May numbers up 1.3% relative to April tells me that that expectation is still built in.
Retail prices came out this week as well. As we look at those, I kind of would have to think that it's pretty good news across the board.
Yeah, so we got April information out on the beef and pork retail prices, and I will say we continue to see some interesting price moves that I think is good for livestock producers. Retail beef prices, choice beef prices for the fourth consecutive month have been higher. They averaged $5.93 for the month of April. That is 17 cents below a year ago. So we are still running below those maybe records that we saw in 2015, 2016. At the same time, when you look at the retail pork side of the equation, so we averaged $3.75 on retail pork prices for April of this year. That's a nickel below a year ago and about 3 cents lower than where we were the previous month. But given the supplies we're bringing, it's pretty good on both fronts of the beef and pork markets.
When we look at comparisons, are we saying granted both seem like they're a fairly decent deal at the grocery store, but is one priced comparison that makes maybe pork a better buy or seem like a better buy? And how does that reflect on the producer side or on the demand supply side?
Yeah, so I think when you do look at where pork prices are relative to beef, we look at where we are right now, and we're sitting with pork about 63% of the price of beef. You can't find many times where we've seen that kind of ratio. Now, it's been in play here for a number of months. I think this is more than 20 months in a row now where we've seen that pork retail price relative to the beef retail price be 65% or less. And so I think as we look at 2017, we have to remind ourselves, despite what's fairly large supplies of hogs coming to the marketplace, that pork price at the end of the day looks pretty good in relative to beef prices. I think that helps when we see consumers going to the grocery store. It also helps the food service side. It gives us in that pork market a chance to maybe feature relative to beef that we haven't seen for a while, given those relative prices. And again, I remind you that you got to go back probably decades to find a situation where pork was that attractive relative to beef prices for such a long period of time.
And it's always, it tastes great too. So it's an easy pickup at the grocery store, I would assume.
Absolutely. And I think we certainly see some good opportunities for what would be very good quality pork to be featured. The prices that we have, I think certainly gives consumers an alternative. That's for sure.
How does the grilling season play into that? We're getting close to Memorial Day. So I think like ribs and pork chops and those types of things on the grill, does that help in the long run as well?
I think absolutely. I think when you see where we sit right now with what's really getting into the full swing of grilling season is helpful. I will say, however, we don't want to forget to have a little bit of this bacon discussion. When you think about what's been driving those pork prices, we tend to love bacon in this country, and we tend to find it on a number of things. So it is beyond grilling that I'll say helps on the pork side of the equation, and the fact that we seem to find more and more places to add bacon to the product, it certainly helps the pork side.
While we're on this topic of pork, Iowa State's farrow to finish returns came out for April. It's the first time we've seen a negative number this year. What do we take from that?
Yeah, so we are down $7 a hog in terms of being negative for the first time. I will say, when you look at what we get from Iowa State on those farrow to finish returns, number one, the thing that sticks out is just how costs have been fairly stable for a long number of months now. It wasn't that long ago that we talked a lot about just the sheer volatility in costs as we had feed costs moving all over. But we've seen corn prices and soybean meal prices relatively stable. So the cost side of the equation hasn't really moved. It's frankly, when you look at those April numbers, it's been lower hog prices that led to the negative numbers. And if you think about where we sit right now, we're getting a little bit of strength in hog prices of late. As we've moved into May, I expect as we get here the next couple of months, we'll be back on the black side of that pork farrow to finish return. So perhaps some good months laying ahead for pork producers as those feed costs remain in check.
We're going to talk about global demand for both pork and beef here shortly. Let's start first and talk a little bit about cattle weights and what are some of the things that you're noticing when it comes to weights and markets.
Yeah, so if you look at some of the data we have available to us, I look at the week of April 30th and go, we ended up with that average steer dressed weight at 832 pounds. And when you think about that, that's down 15 pounds relative to the previous week, down more than 30 pounds relative to last year. And we may go, what happened there? And I don't want us to forget some of the winter weather that I think affected cattle feed yards over that same period of time. So when we think about some of the strength we saw in cattle prices and some of the strength we see in choice beef cutout relative to select. Those lighter weight cattle that we brought to the market as a result of what I think was some weather-related events, I think certainly has been at play in terms of where we go. And I'll say it's actually reduced, the percentage growth in beef production that we've seen so far in 2017 relative to the previous year. And we'll have to wait and see, but I expect we'll catch back up a little bit in terms of weights, despite the fact we'll still see them run below year-ago levels. That'll bring more beef to the market, but it is important to understand the effects that we saw from some of that snowy weather that we saw in many parts of cattle feeding country.
Mother Nature has had a temper tantrum this year, I think. I mean, you look at the blizzards in those parts of the country. You've had the flooding, another mass round of storms that have been moving in this week, and it's been just one weather blow after another to producers of all different varieties this year.
Yes, absolutely. And so I sometimes go, well, we're really early in the corn growing season in terms of making the crop, at least at this point. And we're behind where we've been last year. It's really important to see how this all unfolds, I think, in the next week or so in terms of corn plantings. And again, I remind, from a livestock perspective, those feed costs have been much lower than we've seen for a long period of time. I certainly wouldn't want folks to get caught in a situation where markets start to catch fire on the feed cost side and not being locked in with some of the very attractive feed costs that we see today.
All right, we're going to talk exports and international trade. Let's start first. We taped a day early last week on Friday, and I think I even sent you a message Friday that said, oh my gosh, could this have happened? It couldn't have happened yesterday. China, really one more hurdle cleared to getting U.S. beef into China. They still have to figure out some of the technical side of things. We know that it's a massive growing middle class in that country. But is it just those meats, those middle meats that we're looking at, or is there opportunity for other growth for U.S. beef there?
Yeah, so I think, there's really a couple things that at play when you think about demand in China. So number one, I think when you look at the kinds of products that the Chinese have imported from a beef standpoint, and again, not necessarily from the United States, but from everyone in the rest of the world, it tends to be some of the lower valued products that maybe we don't value so much or don't consume so much here in the United States. And opening that market may give us an opportunity to move some of those kinds of products to China in the very short term. However, I don't think that's really where we see the longer term potential benefits from U.S. beef being traded into China. I continue to look at some of the upper class in China that have growing incomes, that maybe are looking for more of a Western diet, that I think fits very well with some of the higher quality beef that we produce here in the United States today. So in the short run, yes, we may get some growth in those lower valued products, but I think the real brass ring we might be trying to grab for here longer term is very much that higher end market in China. And I think we certainly have a comparative advantage for that. So we'll wait and see how long it takes to get through the rest of the technical barriers, but being able to trade U.S. beef into China will certainly be helpful to us, both short and long term.
With a goal of mid-July, and the middle of July is really not that far away when you think about it. 2 months from yesterday.
That's exactly right. And I will say we have things left to deal with there. So we have set, I believe, July 16th as a deadline for product to move. A lot of things from animal ID that might be voluntary in this country relative to mandatory in some other parts of the world. I think those are going to be at play. Non-GMO. So we have a few hurdles left to cross, I think, before we start seeing product moving. But it is one step forward that we haven't seen for a long time. And hopefully we'll get through the rest of the technical barriers and we will see trade begin to happen by the time we get mid-July.
And final thing today, Lighthizer was the U.S. Trade Representative was confirmed a week ago or a little over a week ago, and a week later is notifying Congress of the administration's intent to renegotiate and modernize NAFTA. When you look at it, when you look at those trade agreements, or that trade agreement specifically for livestock producers, I can't think that they want too much of that changed. How does that potentially impact markets on the beef and pork side and poultry?
Yeah, so it's pretty early in the process, but it is amazing how quickly we are trying to move forward in that renegotiation process. I guess as I look at where we're headed on the NAFTA side, I'll say a lot of the things we're interested in renegotiating may not be directly ag related. It's a number of things that maybe we hadn't thought about or that weren't developed that we're now talking about trading, that I think creating the renegotiated NAFTA could be helpful with. But when you think about the fact we have virtually no tariffs in many of the meat products, all we really want to see is that market remain open to us, and perhaps some of the things we continue to stay focused on, or some of the sanitary and phytosanitary issues that make sure that if issues do arise, that those markets that market remains open to us as much as possible. So perhaps that's some of the issues that we're going to be more focused on from a livestock perspective.
And you look at the fact that Mexico and Canada are both top 5 trading partners for U.S. in both pork and beef. You don't want to lose it.
We have to maintain those markets. I continue to sound like a broken record, but we have larger supplies of beef and pork both in the marketplace today, and these countries remain important to us, because if we lose those markets and we have to back that product up into the United States to be consumed, I think you and I both know the effect on prices for producers, and it could be not so much fun to revisit some of the much lower prices that we saw not just that long ago. If you think back to October of 2016, cattle and hog prices both not in territory that many wanted to see. So it doesn't take long for these markets to adjust, and it's been a nice run here as we've gone through 2017, but we need international markets to remain open, and Mexico and Canada both are important to that.
Any reports we're watching for next week, Scott?
By and large, it's not a number of large reports that we have available to us next week. So we'll see cold storage out. Might give us a little more information on whether we're backing anything up in freezers. That'll come out on Monday. We get livestock slaughter come Thursday. And we're also going to see cattle on feed out on Friday. So another look at what we're doing on the placement side of the cattle industry, and really sets the stage for me in terms of the latter part of 2017 and what's coming in terms of beef supplies.
All right. Have a great weekend. And next week we'll be heading into a holiday week, because we'll go into Memorial Day weekend then. So the peak of grilling season, I think.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend, Megan.
All right, we'll talk to you next Friday. To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com and click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there. And for market updates twice daily, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can check out John Perkins' Market Minute. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.